Welcome back, Camden Catholic. Oh, man. So y'all are actually, like, killing it right now. Really, really impressing me for the first week. We're moving quick. We're doing a lot of stuff. Y'all are reviewing really, really well. The number one thing I would say to do this weekend, you will have a flip this weekend, but it will be pretty short. Number one thing I would say to do this weekend, though, is that just kind of glance over the stuff from the first few days. Just to kind of keep it fresh on your mind and just to be prepared for your first test coming up in a couple of weeks and just keep it fresh, all right? Because we've been going quickly, and this is meant to be much more of a review of things that you were supposed to learn in, like, middle school, right? So, but getting into it, we talked today about the differences between Egypt and Mesopotamia, right? We talked about how, like, Egyptian government was a centralized government ruled from one location. Mesopotamians were a series of city-states. We talked about how there was a greater amount of trade in Mesopotamia, right? We talked about how there's, we didn't really go over all this stuff, but there was greater technology in Mesopotamia, like larger mechanisms for building huge ziggurats, as well as more advanced agricultural systems, irrigation systems that were much more intricate in Mesopotamia. Women had a higher status in Egypt, though. Some women actually even grew up to be like pharaohs themselves, right? Nefertiti, Akhenaten. Akhenaten is the name of King Tut's mother, who was actually pharaoh herself. And then what's another? There was another really, really famous one, but I think those are the only two that are really coming to mind. But anyway, so they also were polytheistic, right? So, whoa. Hold on. This right here, polytheistic, should go in there, similarities. I apologize about that. So drag this and put an arrow that it actually is a similarity. So but a bunch of similarities between the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians are they both had systems of writing, they both developed systems of math, and they also both had stratified governments, right? Because remember, we talked about how, like, the four big components of civilization are job specialization, social classes, complex religious systems, and also a government as well, right? So let's keep going, though. Now we're talking about the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, when I talk about the Eastern Mediterranean, I mean these small empires to the east and how they kind of had a small effect on the Egyptians and Mesopotamians. But these are all of our guys that set the foundation work for the Greeks coming in, which is what we're going to be getting into over the weekend. So getting after it, though, the Hebrews are a big one, and I know in my first period we already talked about this a little bit, so y'all can kind of just make sure you have all this stuff. I added a few things, so make sure you jot it down. Now, the Hebrews are from the modern Israel era, all right? To give you an example where that is, this is the Mediterranean Sea. Here is Egypt and North Africa. You have Saudi Arabia over here in the Middle East, the modern-day Middle East anyway. And then you have the modern-day Israel area and Judah. So where Jerusalem is, one of, like, the holy city of Christianity, is where the ancient Hebrews actually used to reside. And they were there around 900 BC, right? They were actually kicking along all the while the Egyptians and while the Mesopotamians were doing their thing as well. Well, remember, Mesopotamia is a whole region. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, Neo-Babylonians, and then some other guys that we'll talk about here in a minute called the Assyrians, right? So, but to give you an understanding of who these guys are, they are the very, very first large-based monotheistic system, as in they believe in one God, right? One God, and they called him Yahweh, right? So, very, very, very revolutionary for the time in history. They operate out of a central book called the Tanakh. A lot of people believe that the Torah is their one holy book. It actually not necessarily is. The Torah is one part of 3 books that go into the Tanakh, or the Jewish Bible, right? So, also the Jewish Bible actually includes the very first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Christian Bible as well. It's Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Exodus, and Genesis. Speaking of Exodus, there's some of y'all are going to, like, you're thinking to yourself, well, weren't the Jews slaves to the Egyptians? A lot of historical data says that there's a chance that that might have only been a small group of Jewish people, because there is no evidence, historically speaking, of a large migration out of Egypt of slaves at any point. So it's a very interesting thing to look up, and we're still, as a historical community, trying to research it and maybe find the foundations of where that story comes from. But the Torah is their common book practice, right? It sets their diet, their restrictions, marital age, age of becoming a man or a woman in society, your bar mitzvah, your bat mitzvah. It goes over the 10 Commandments. It has all of the daily practices inside of it, right? Keeping it kosher, all right? So the first, also, is the very first Abrahamic faith. Now, some of you are like, what's an Abrahamic faith? Write these down really quick. There are three, count them, three Abrahamic faiths that exist throughout all of history. There is Judaism, the Hebrews, right? So write the Judaism, Judaism, I believe it's Judaism, Judaics, or the Judaism, right? So that's your Jewish population. Then there are also Christians. Christians are an Abrahamic faith, right? We believe in the God of Abraham, right? So, and then the third Abrahamic faith is the Nation of Islam, all right? ISLAM, the Nation of Islam, or Muslim people, right? They are also an Abrahamic faith. We'll talk about that when we discuss the split between the two of them and kind of the belief practices of the Islamic faith later on in the next couple of weeks. So, let's keep going. So this right here, that is where it was located in current-day Israel. You've heard a lot of these cities before in your religion class, I'm sure. Damascus, Jerusalem. There's also another, Nazareth is another large one as well. Very important, still considered one of our holy lands today. So then there are the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are often forgot about simply because they didn't really settle anywhere. The Phoenicians had small city-states all over the Mediterranean because they were on the Middle Eastern coast and they were a trading society. They were master shipbuilders. The reason why I have purple people right here is not because they actually have purple skin, but Phoenician in Greek, where they got their name from, or where we understand their name coming from, actually means purple people because of the dye that they use to dye some of their cloth a certain color of purple. I think the last time I read up on this, that it was actually came from a specific type of snail shell that they would pulverize and then use to create dye out of. So they also created their biggest impact in history. Star this, underline this area right down here. It's very important. They created the very, very first simple alphabet that our current-day phonetic alphabet is based off of. To give you an understanding what that means, their alphabet was separated into letters, right? Just like ours is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? And then those letters go together to create words that actually, it makes it much easier to learn that way. In Mesopotamia and in Egypt, they had pictographic writing, all right? Those are symbols, specific pictures mean specific things. And the problem with that is it's very complex to learn. You're talking about thousands of different symbols that could possibly be used. So, with that, a simple, very, very simple alphabet the Phoenicians contributed to all of history. Theirs only had 22 letters and no vowels. So, when the Greeks would actually adopt this alphabet, they would add vowels. They would then transport that to the Romans. The Romans would write it in Latin. The Latins would teach it to all of Europe, and now we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So thanks, Phoenicians. We really, really appreciate it. So even though, ironically enough, I'm one of the worst spellers on the planet. So this is what the Phoenician Empire looked like. All this in blue, right? So you've got all the southern Spanish coast, a lot of North Africa, and then also right here over towards the modern-day Israel where the Hebrews were as well. That's your Phoenicians, right? So another guys, though, these ones are fun to talk about. These guys are the Assyrians, right? So the Assyrians were a warrior culture that aided in the addition of a couple of things to all of history, right? Biggest thing that they contributed is the fact that they conquered the entire Fertile Crescent, right? Conquered the entire Fertile Crescent. They conquered the area that you know of as Mesopotamia, right? So some of you have seen that, see the Tigris and the Euphrates right there? They conquered all that stuff in orange, okay? So their biggest thing, though, is their contributions to military technology as well as record keeping. All right, so they are well known for making examples out of fallen armies and using them as propaganda of sorts and taking over large expanses of land, but they didn't last for very long because they were making everyone so mad and disgusted with them. Everybody hated them so much, and I'll show you a picture of why that was here in about 2 seconds. So they were very, very well known for conquering that whole area, but their biggest contribution to history is they created ironworking. So they led us out of this thing called the Bronze Age, and they actually showed us how to manipulate things like iron and create sharper weapons. And they also made the first libraries, right? And what they would do when they took over an area, any of their recorded materials, they would take it and then put it inside of a building for their own use. Bang! First libraries, right? They were very, very, very good at keeping track of any past events and things like that, right? So, speaking of propaganda, this is your Assyrians right here. Very brutal, very militarily smart. They had all types of different contributions to the military sphere. They invented chariots first. They invented types of longbows first. They invented these things called satraps, and satraps were these people that would dig underneath walls and then pop up inside of a city and actually storm it underground. One of the craziest things that they were most known for was the invention pretty much of propaganda. And what I mean by propaganda is creating a visual message basically to send to other people to kind of scare them into thinking a certain way. Now you see this in the background. The Assyrians were known for doing two different things that were very, very public examples of execution to keep the people they had conquered very, very scared, right? So one of the big ones that they would do is when they would execute people, they would actually flay them. And flaying is when they would actually take a person's body of a city that they were taking over to try and intimidate the population into paying their taxes and staying loyal to the Assyrian Empire. They would actually take a knife and cut around the neck without nicking any of the arteries, then down through the chest, and then they would actually peel the skin back, all right? It's called flaying someone. So they would also then cut the wrist and stuff and then pull it off, so basically it was like a skin suit. I mean, like, parents, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry, but it happened, all right? We got to talk about it, you know what I mean? Because, and then the other big thing is, you see in the background back here, these people on sticks, very well known for doing a thing that even the English did in like the 1600s. Let's like calm down a little bit. But the way they did it was very, very brutal. They would take people's bodies and use them as examples and then put them on sticks and then hang them outside of villages to show what would happen to people if they rebelled against the Assyrians after being taken over by them. So they would do it in a certain fashion because you couldn't necessarily put a stick or a pike is what's called through their body, because then you have like a shish kebab situation where it slides all the way down. So they would actually take it and either slide it through the pelvis or underneath the chest cavity, so the pike would actually sit right here and the body would hang on top of it. It's some very morbid stuff, but it's intense. And the reason why we're talking about that is the reason why the Assyrians fell. Is because these people called the Neo-Babylonians, led by this guy named Nebuchadnezzar, actually united together to take them down due to the fact that everyone hated them so much. And in contrast, then there were the Persians that held on for a long time, overtook the Assyrians, overtook the Neo-Babylonians, and conquered the entire Middle Eastern area and had the biggest empire that the ancient world had ever seen, right? They went all the way from northern India all the way through the Middle East, all the way up into where Greece and the Balkans are, all the way down into northern Africa. Humongous area. Absolutely enormous. For those of you who have seen the movie 300 with Gerard Butler about like the Spartans, right? That's who he's fighting, is the Persians, all right? They are the most dominant ancient empire, period. Hands down, the most militarily dominant. Even though they lost to the Greeks, but that had a lot to do with more like political corruption and stuff like that, all right? We'll get into that later. But the biggest reason why they were able to take over so many people, it's genius. Under this guy named not Sargon the Great, sorry about that. Under this guy named, he was an Akkadian. Under this guy named Cyrus the Great, he preached the idea of tolerance. When you would be taken over by Cyrus, he would tell them, you are allowed to practice your own faith. You are allowed to keep your own economy. You are allowed to keep some of your own governing officials. But you must pay your taxes and recognize us as your rulers. And that's it. People were happy doing this. They conquered an area spanning all the way from northern India all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, and they have contributed a lot of stuff to history. They invented money. Under King Darius I, they invented the very first money-based economy. They took precious metals and began to coin them as a form of exchange, right? So your product is worth about 5 to 6 of these. Before that, it was all a barter-based economy, which was very, very difficult. They are also the very first major Eastern culture because their war with the Greeks actually split that cultural line and made them one of our very first dominant Eastern cultures, and then the Greeks over on the other side, one of our first Western cultures. So they would also become the basis for what you know as the Nation of Islam. That is where it took its roots, right? So that's it, all right? I hope you all have a great evening. Very good stuff. Very proud. Very impressed with everything y'all been doing up to this point. Let's keep getting after it. I'll see you guys later.